Hey guys, Sleepy Reader. This is Sleepy Vlog number 8. My last video was a vlog also. That's because I wasn't able to get my comics in a timely manner. I finally got them on Sunday and still haven't had time to read more than one or two of them. So I haven't had a chance to make a review video. But I had a bunch of other thoughts or things I saw or heard that I thought I'd make a vlog about, because I like to make videos. If anyone's worrying that I'm an alcoholic, just about the only time I drink beer now is when I do make these vlogs. I probably have about 2 beers a week these days. Couldn't make it to my comic book store because things were just really busy domestically, and I have my subscriptions at a faraway store that's a really cool place. So I've discussed that before, and this was definitely a week where I kind of wished I went to the less good nearby store and just where I could just pick up my comics like that. And I think this week will be the same way. I probably won't be able to get to my comic book store till the weekend, and on the weekend I'll be too busy to actually read them. The way my life goes is I have a little more free time during the week, a few hours here and there, like on my lunch break, than I do on the weekend, where I usually end up being the main parent on the weekend. Plus, like I've been painting my house. You can see bits of paint on me. Not my house, my garage. That's been keeping me busy too. So anyway, part of what made me realize that I would like to just let you guys know a few things is on Bleeding Cool, the website, they had the audio from Alan Moore's first comic book convention appearance in like 15 or 20 or 30 years, 25 years, I can't remember. The NICE convention. I think Steve Comics SWG said he went there, but he didn't mention Alan Moore, so maybe he didn't get to go to the Alan Moore talk. But anyway, they had a recording of it, and it was really interesting. At first, it was kind of boring. He was sort of talking about movie deals and stuff, and it took me a while to get into it. But as he got going, I got into it, and a lot of interesting insights. So I'm going to put the link down below, and I recommend you listen to at least the second half of it. Obviously, especially if you're interested in Alan Moore. I definitely think he's a genius, of a real genius. Like, there's a lot of talented people, like say Mark Waid. He's really talented and he's really hardworking, but I don't think of him as a genius the way Alan Moore just seems. He just always seems to do something a little, makes more connections than other people do, or does other things that other people just don't do. So it was interesting. You got in various little ways sort of snippets of his process and everything. Although I think knowing the process of a genius doesn't mean you can imitate it. In a way, it's better to know the process of a more regular person who's figured out ways to be successful. But still, it's interesting to see the way his mind works. He talked a lot about the film stuff, but then he talked about the ABC series of comics, the Tom Strong, Promethea, and the Top 10 period, which I really liked those also. I mean, they weren't, on the blow your mind level of Watchmen or anything, but a very interesting group of comics. And he said his whole concept there was that comic books had their origins in the pulps, and he was going to turn back the clock and make comic books that were only, rather than being influenced by other comics, were influenced by the early pulps that the comic books first came from. Kind of just the way his mind works. Someone else might make terrible comics out of that, but I thought Tom Strong and Top 10 and Promethea were all very good. And he talks about how really before that, when he wrote superhero comics, he was always trying to destroy superhero comics and Miracle Man and Watchmen and such. And then he kind of decried grimness in comic books, which in a way is kind of ironic. He was down on his own comic book, The Killing Joke. He thought that was the worst thing he did. And he thought when he wrote Watchmen that people wouldn't come away with the grimness of it, but with all the great techniques he came up with, storytelling techniques. I think he's a bit too hard on his fellow comic book creators. I think a lot of them did run with interesting storytelling techniques over the years. But anyway, he focused on their failures to get what he was doing. And then he's really down on Stan Lee, which connects. A few vlogs ago I talked about the Steve Ditko movie where they kind of come down hard on Stan Lee. And he basically seems to think that Stan Lee did nothing and that it was all Steve Ditko and Jack Kirby, with Stan taking all the credit for it. And I still, as much as I love Ditko and Kirby, especially Kirby, I still think Stan Lee had a lot to do with it. I mean, you had this whole flowering of Marvel Comics, and it was all centered around Stan Lee. Did he just suddenly learn how to con all the artists into giving him their work? There was something else going on there. Maybe he no doubt didn't give enough credit to other people. But he must have had a lot to do with it for so many good comics to come out that were connected with him all in this short period of time. So yeah, and listening to him makes me want to go read more Alan Moore. I've collected the recent League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, the 3 books he just came out with, and I haven't read those yet. And I was thinking about how he had a novel out quite a while ago, but I never read that. And I think I'm waiting on Fashion Beast. I probably won't buy individual issues, but probably I'll buy his graphic novel. But I don't know if he's gone past his peak finally. But it sounds like he's still busy and very creative. So very interesting podcast. Or in the podcast format, it wasn't actually a podcast. So if you're at all interested in Alan Moore, definitely check that out. Another interesting thing, I've been watching all of Minutia Minute's videos about Batman, and when he was covering Hush by Jeff Loeb and Jim Lee, he kind of referred to that as a kicking off of a mini Silver Age of comics, which I think he identified as 2002, 2007. So this is kind of a shout out to him because I believe you that there was a Silver Age then. But I'm hoping you'll define it a little more or tell us more about some other examples of that Silver Age. I mean, it's very recent comic book history. I'm afraid during that period I was reading a hodgepodge of trades and just random things I was picking up. I wasn't following comic books very closely. It's easier for me to see the trends in earlier periods. The one thing I can think of is that sort of coming out of the 90s, we even though art is now really fantastic, we had kind of a throwing away of the artists as being the important people, and there was a lot of focus on the writers. And so I wonder if part of that golden age, Silver Age that Minutia Minute Beardo was referring to is this period of recruitment of writers. And, like Scott Snyder, I believe, was pulled out of the literary world. Someone read a book of short stories he wrote and decided maybe he could do comics. They were pulling lots of people out of Hollywood. They got Joss Whedon. They got J. Michael Straczynski, for better or worse. Greg Rucka came from the world of writing mystery novels. And Brad Meltzer, too, and other people like that. So I don't know if that's the kind of Silver Age that Sean is thinking about, but the Beardo's thinking about. But so I'd want to hear more about the Golden Age, I keep saying golden, the Silver Age that we may have just passed through, and why did it end in 2007? my focus is off for the 2000s. I have a certain sense of the other decades, and I don't have a good focus on what happened in the 2000s. And I guess probably from 2006 till 2010, I was hardly reading any comics of any sort, just because of life overwhelming me for a while. Yeah, another interesting video, someone else's video, was King Joe, who did a rant about the prices of comics, and he also included in that the fact that comics are not viable for kids anymore. And it does seem like even in the 90s, although they were more adult oriented, you could still show most comics to kids. And now there's enough. I've talked about this before. I mean, there's so many comics I can't even let my daughter open the page because something awful's gonna show up there. You know, back when maybe the rough stuff was more in the dialogue and wasn't being shown in the pictures, you could just read a comic to a kid and skip certain parts, but I don't feel like I can do that. But anyway, the main thrust of King Joe's rant was that the prices are way too high, and that he suggests a 1-month boycott by fans of comics. No one buy any comic books for a whole month, and that would make the prices go down. And that probably would work if you could get, 50% of all comic book buyers to boycott comic book stores for a month. It would throw them into a panic. It's hard to imagine how that would be organized. I think, on a smaller level, boycotting the $4 comics would send a strong message. The more we buy $4 comics, the more, as long as they don't see a hit in their profits, they're going to go for the $4 comics. So yeah, as you all guys all know, I try as hard as I can to not spend $4 on a comic book. And back when I did my yesteryear kind of thing with Wonder Woman, and I looked at what the prices, like I looked at a website that gave you kind of price comparisons from then and now, and that what was once a 15-cent comic book in spending power would now be $1.80. So you could sort of imagine $2 being a reasonable price for a comic book, except that perhaps they pay creators a lot more now. But the other thing is they sell a lot less comic books. They probably can't charge nearly as much for advertising. In fact, when you look at a comic book, most of the advertising tends to be in-house advertising, ads for other comic books. So they're not making a whole lot of money from their advertising. And maybe that's their own fault. They're not doing a good enough job selling advertising. I'm not sure, what the backdrop of all of that is. I'm always pissed that if you were to buy all the monthly comic books, you're paying so much more than you would for the trade. And that doesn't make any sense to me. The monthly comic books have the ads in them. That should at least reduce the price somewhat. So logically, it should cost a little less to buy, in my mind, the monthly comics than the trade. But for some reason, that's not the case. So yeah, if anyone can organize a boycott of buying comics for a month, I would stop buying comics for a month. Of course, I would be hoping then to pick up the comics I'd missed the next month. So yeah, there's a problem with wanting to get your comic books and really, really boycotting something. But I'm hoping more and more people will just say no to $4 comics and just wait till those ones hit the trades or hit the dollar bins, and that will start sending a message. Obviously, they can produce the same comic book for $3 or $4, and if you'll buy them for $4, they'll keep making them for $4. Why not? I guess for the company themselves, that's probably an extra 50 cents profit off the top. It seemed like there was something more I wanted to say about that. Yeah, so another MAW000 can't remember the number at the end there. He's a couple of times talked about, and most recently in his Q&A thing, about how he'd be happy if comic books were cheaper and were just printed on cheaper paper. And I think I could go for that. And I imagine that might be also where, with comic books that cost 15 cents should now cost $1.80, where $1.80, $2 should be the price of a comic book printed on somewhat cheaper paper. And I'd buy a lot more comic books if they were $2 and be pretty happy with the cheaper paper. Although the nice paper is nice, particularly, when you get a really, really great artist on it. These are comics I haven't read yet, but anyway, it's food for thought. We really, our buying habits are what sends the message to comic book companies for what they can charge. Of course, they always have a bottom line. I mean, they can't lose money on comic books, or they can't lose money on the combination of comic books and trades. They probably do lose money on some of the lower end books in hopes of getting it back in the trades. I think in publishing, comic books are unique in that you can kind of subsidize the long creation of something that's like a novel, a graphic novel, by putting it out in monthly installments and having a certain group of readers buy the monthly installments, and thus paying your artists and writers, getting some money pretty quickly to pay your artists and writers, rather than the normal publishing model, which would be you pay the writer in advance, like when you're publishing a novel, you pay the writer in advance, and then you wait a year for the writer to write the whole novel, and then you publish it, and then you wait another year for all the profits, if there are profits, to roll in. So you have to put you have to put money like 2 years in advance if you're a publisher of regular books, before you'll probably see the profits. So comic book publishers have this kind of unique opportunity. I keep holding up this one. Comic book publishers have a unique opportunity with this monthly readership to, in a sense, be able to take more risks, I think, and to publish maybe more books than they would otherwise. So it's interesting, but they should appreciate us floppy readers. We are a very important part of the ecosystem. And if they drive us away with high prices, then they won't be able to subsidize the books, the trade paperbacks. So yeah, that's my addition to King Joe's rant. So I'll link to King Joe and to Minutia Minute down below, and of course to the audio track of the Alan Moore. Anything else on my mind? Lots of other comic book trivia, but maybe I'll stop there. Looking forward to anyone else doing some ranting. That was a lot of fun to watch King Joe rant. Looking forward to more Minutia Minute talking about the Silver Age of comics. And, of course, loving all of his nearly daily Batman rundowns. Makes me want to run out and buy a lot of Batman. Good stuff. Talk to you all later.